So now that the DJI FPV drone has been released and pre-orders are in, I thought it was perfect time to have a come to Jesus on who this drone is for and what you can really expect when you start getting into FPV from things like a Mavic or a Phantom, even some Inspire pilots. So who's this video for? This video is not for seasoned FPV pilots, although I welcome you to watch. This video is for anyone who is thinking about purchasing the new FPV drone from DJI, who might be coming from a Mavic or a Mavic Mini or a Phantom. This just kind of goes into everything that goes into FPV flying and what you might expect going from something like a Phantom or a Mavic to the DJI FPV drone. FPV is not an easy thing to do. It's just not. It requires so much skill and so much time and effort and knowledge of the different drones and parts and flying environments, radio frequency environments, that it's not, even though DJI makes this drone so that you can plug the battery in and turn everything on and then go, that's not how you're going to get the FPV footage that you see all of these professional pilots post. So in this video, I just wanted to have a come to Jesus so that we can all be a little bit more realistic about what this drone means for people who are going to buy it, and what the capabilities of it might be, and some different use cases that you might have for this drone. There's so much that goes into flying FPV that I won't be able to cover all of it in this video. But to start, I wanted to touch on a few basic principles. The first is controlling the drone, and controlling it based on the fact that you've got goggles on your face and the remote's in your hand. Secondly, I want to talk about propellers. I also want to talk about RF environments and RF frequencies a little bit. And lastly, I want to talk about building and repairing drones. So a big key difference when you're flying FPV versus something like a Mavic is the fact that you've got the goggles on your head and the remote in your hand. And typically when you're flying a Mavic, you can see what the drone is doing and then look down at the controls, look down at all the buttons, make your choices, and then look back up and see what it's doing. Because the Mavic isn't really flying at a continuous rate, maybe around objects and stuff like that. You're sort of controlling it and looking up at it, controlling it, looking up at it. So it's a big difference when you now have the goggles on your head and the controller in your hand. You've got to manage everything by feel and use what you're seeing in the goggles to make the control changes. Now, I know DJI's got the stabilized modes where it flies almost exactly like a Mavic, and you've got the controls in your hand, and if you stop controlling it, it'll sort of sit and hover, so you're not worried about crashing into something. But that's not what's going to get you the shots like you see on Johnny FPV or all these professional pilots. That's not the acrobatic FPV style of flying. That's the Mavic style of flying. So it's a big difference. And especially now, a lot of FPV pilots to this day still sit down because they get dizzy when they've got the goggles on their head and they're doing all of these cool moves. It'll kind of make them feel like vertigo a little bit. And so it's a big culture shock. It's a big difference when you go from flying the Mavic way to flying the FPV way. So it's something you definitely have to be prepared for. In addition to that, even though they have all of these oh shit buttons and GPS return to home buttons, when you're in the heat of flying and you're flying 5 feet away from objects or even closer, even to this day, I forget which buttons do what sometimes, just because it's human nature. We're not perfect, and even on my remote, I've got everything set up exactly the same for every drone. Sometimes I'll flip the wrong switch and disarm the drone, and then it falls out of the sky when I meant to put it in angle mode, or I meant to do GPS return to home. Stupid things to do, but nonetheless, it happens. And so if you think that you're going to fly the DJI FPV drone and then hit the oh shit button real quick if you feel like you're going to get in trouble, don't count on that. You might not be able to hit it fast enough, or you might get confused on which button does what, and then hit the wrong button, which will cause you to crash. So there's just lots of different things to take into consideration when you're going from a Mavic to this style of flying. Propellers. There's something really important, and every FPV pilot has bags and bags and bags of propellers. Propellers are specific to what you're trying to accomplish. So if you're trying to accomplish the fastest freestyle moves and flippy flops and all that stuff as possible, you're going to want maybe a really aggressive propeller. If you're trying to get really precise flip moves, you're going to want something that's maybe not as aggressive, that's going to give you a lot more throttle resolution and a lot more resolution on your rolls and flips. If you're trying to go long range, you're going to want bi-blade propellers. These are going to give you the most efficiency on the motor so that you can get the most battery life, so that you can have time to get out to where it is you're trying to film. So propellers are really specific to what it is that you're trying to do. Now with the DJI FPV drone, they've released it with a set, propeller spec, 3-blade propeller, and this could possibly change in the future. They might offer some different options, but the biggest issue that I see with that is, one, you're going to have to pay for the expensive propellers from DJI. Two, you're not going to be able to adjust the propellers right off the bat, at least, depending on your flying circumstance. For example, I would never fly this prop down at sea level back in Dallas because it's got much too high of pitch. This prop is great for here at 8,000 feet because it's going to have a higher angle of attack, which is going to push more air. But because the air is thinner, it basically does nearly the exact same thing as this one, but at 8,000 feet. When they say 89 miles per hour top speed, you'll never hit that with those standard props at elevation. There's just not enough density in the air. And it's also true for the battery life. So that's kind of one thing to consider when you're flying a DJI FPV drone is, even if they do make more propeller options, they're never going to be as many as you can get with a standard 5-inch FPV setup with a 5mm prop shaft. Now let's get on to the biggest issue here. Flying the FPV drone the same way that you see all of these awesome videos. Right now, when you get the drone, it's set up in that sort of standard Mavic flying style. And that's great. That's going to let people get into the air and sort of hover around and fly it just like a Mavic. But if you want it to fly anything similar to what you see on any of these awesome videos from Mr. Steele or Ladrib or Johnny FPV or any of those guys, you're going to have to put it into the acro mode. And when you do that, it's a whole different ballgame. FPV pilots have spent hours, weeks, days, months on the simulator, and even a lot of them now still practice on the simulator just to keep their moves fresh and to gain that muscle memory. A lot of what you see when you see people doing like these really cool split S moves and power loops and going through trees and stuff, a lot of that is literal muscle memory. You have to put the time in to gain that muscle memory on, when I'm upside down this way and I know the ground's coming, down here, I need to, by muscle memory, flip the sticks this particular way to get it to level out and do whatever particular move I'm trying to do. And you're never going to learn that until you practice for hours and hours and crash a lot. There's a lot of crashing involved. It's just part of the hobby. And I think for every cool video that you see someone put out, like Johnny FPV or Mr. Steele or any of those guys, they've probably crashed 10 times for every single video. And it's not like they crash 10 times and then they get a good video. It's like if you total all of the crashes that they've had to do from when they first started until now getting these cool videos, it's probably been 1,000, even more. And I mean, even to this day, I crash all the time. It's just part of it. And when you're going from a Mavic and then you see this cool new DJI FPV drone and you think, I'll just get it, and for $12.99 I'll be able to get all those awesome shots that all those guys get. I mean, this is a hobby that has skill. And a lot of these FPV guys are hardcore in practicing and training and always trying to better their skills to get these cool kind of videos. And if you even think about it, like, you can say, well, I don't want to get those exact videos if I can just get something close to it. With FPV, it doesn't really work that way. It's either you're getting 90% there or your videos look boring. You guys can correct me down in the comments if you do fly FPV, But that's kind of been my experience. You know, you think, okay, I'm getting better, and then you watch your video back over and it looks nothing like, you know, some of these better videos. And so it's either you're 90% there or it looks boring. So you have to put the time in, and putting that time in goes back to crashing and repairing and setting up the right props, like I was saying before, setting up the right motor combinations, setting up the right stick feel on your controller, and what kind of rates and stuff like that you have that are going to work better for you. And all of that just takes time. So if you do decide to buy this drone, please don't expect to go ahead and put it, you know, put it up in the air and get all of these awesome shots. You're really only going to be able to get very similar shots to your Mavic, except in this case, you won't be able to look all the way down. So you'll be able to get maybe some cool like treetop cruising shots and stuff like that. But I would strongly advise, do not put it in any kind of manual mode until you've got on a simulator for at least a week, so that you can understand what it is to control FPV. Now let's talk about crashing. Crashing, like I was saying before, is a huge part of the hobby. You're going to crash. Anytime I build a new drone for a customer, or I'm working with someone to try to help them, you know, fly a little bit better, they're always worried about crashing because they're coming from that Mavic Phantom world where a crash means the drone is totaled. In this world, it doesn't, except for the DJI drone, doesn't mean the drone's totaled. Typically, what you'll do is you'll maybe bend a motor shaft. You'll definitely bend propellers all the time. But for the most part, the frames are made of carbon fiber and they're not going to break. You know, you might have to brush some dirt off of it or whatnot, but in general, they're not going to break. So, you know, you just dust yourself back off, you bend the props back, and then you get back into the air and keep practicing. But with the DJI FPV drone, it's not serviceable that way. So if you crash, I mean, we've already seen it. The pictures are already starting to come out. A simple crash, Joshua Bardwell bumped into a tree limb and broke 2 arms. So, you know, it's not something that you're going to be able to repair easily. And no offense, if you're coming from the Mavic side of things, chances are you don't know how to solder. Chances are you don't know, you know, basic motor ESC theory, or you know, how things are really wired up, or what's an antenna wire and what's a motor wire, you know, stuff like that. So and again, that's no offense, we all started somewhere, but if you don't know that kind of stuff, it's going to be even harder for you to figure out how to fix this thing. But moving on, let's say you could fix it. A lot of people are saying that DJI has engineered this to be replaceable, right? So if you break an arm, you can replace an arm. In my opinion, if that was true, when you actually watch how they're put together, the motor wires themselves wouldn't be individually soldered onto the ESC. They would be plug and play. And so you could maybe unscrew a few bolts on an arm and unplug it and then plug it back in. In this case in particular, there's not only motor wires, but there's also LED light wires. So now you have to know which wires are the motor wires, which wires are the LED light wires, and then you've got to take the entire drone apart essentially. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but when you watch the teardown of this drone, the arms are not easily replaced. It's not like there's just 4 bolts around each arm. The plastic goes up and around the whole sides of the drone. And then in addition to that, there's antenna wires going down through the arms. So you're going to have to replace all of those connections. Or maybe let's say you're just able to take the motor out, put a new plastic piece, and you're going to have to learn how to feed all the wires through and, resecure everything, put everything back together. The gimbal honestly seems to be the easiest part that could possibly be replaced, but I don't expect that thing to cost anything less than $150. So something really, really big to consider. You'd be better off buying a Tiny Hawk trainer, which is like $300 for everything, and really learning how FPV works before buying this drone. Lastly, I want to talk about RF environment. The RF environment is something that as an FPV pilot, you come to understand as you start flying in new locations. There's one particular place by my house. It's a huge rock formation way out on the side of a mountain, and it's maybe 2/3 of a mile away, like totally within the range of my setup. But for whatever reason, when I try to fly out, anytime I get anywhere near close to it, my radio signal on the controller starts dying super fast, and my video in my goggles starts getting really, really bad. And that has nothing to do with, my setup. It's all about the radio frequency environment in that particular location. And I'm kind of thinking that there might be like a 2.4 gigahertz or like a 5.8 gigahertz Wi-Fi booster or something for some cabins or something out there that's like really powerful, and so it's messing with it. But as an example, 2/3 of a mile, that's nothing. I've gone 2 miles. I know people who've gone 3 miles with a DJI setup. So it's not something that's wrong with the drone. It's really the particular area that you're flying in, and it's just something that you learn as you fly more. And so when you get the DJI FPV drone, you're not going to be able to just take off and just fly, 10 kilometers or whatever they say the range is on your first flight. You're going to have to learn what RF areas are like, and that's the same thing with if you're flying through a grove of trees. Trees don't have a super high density, and so the radio signal can get through them pretty easily. But let's say you want to start flying through like an abandoned building or something like that. That's a lot different of an RF environment than trees or a forest. So, you might have clear video and then you think, well, I'm just going to fly around the backside of this building. And then within 5 seconds, your video's gone and your controller's gone. And the only thing you have to rely on is maybe that the FPV drone from DJI is smart enough to stop what it's doing and maybe hover and wait there for you to walk around and get more signal, or maybe try to fly home and come back and land by you. That kind of remains to be seen if it will be able to do that. I suspect not entirely, because it only has those front sensors. It won't know if there's something above it. Really something to consider, and this is something that all FPV pilots have come to learn as they fly more. With this drone, and even though it has like home point and all that kind of stuff, it's still really easy to get disoriented. You can fly a mile out towards a mountain and think that you know how to get back. You might not necessarily know the exact right way to go. And GPS doesn't work 100% of the time. So you have to rely on your skills as a pilot to know how you got there and how to get back, or your drone is lost. In summary, I'm not trying to steer you away from getting into the hobby. This hobby is extremely rewarding. It's a lot of fun. It's great to do with your sons or daughters or friends, especially during the pandemic. It's a really rewarding hobby, but you really need to think long and hard about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Is this something that you can accomplish maybe with your Mavic as it stands right now? The Mavic has FPV mode. If you're just trying to do some low treetop cruising, you might be able to just stick with your Mavic or your Phantom. Are you really trying to get into the hobby to do a lot of those flips and rolls and freestyle moves that you see some of these people post? If so, then I don't think this drone is for you, and at least not to start. I think what you should do is look into something like the Tiny Hawk Trainer, or look into building your own really budget, low-end sort of freestyle drone that you can learn on. And then maybe as you get better, move to the DJI FPV drone. But I feel like once you experience the power that can be had from building your own drone, you'll never want to go to something like the new DJI FPV drone. Who do I think this drone is really for? I think it's for someone who is intermediate to advanced to expert, who wants to show up on set with a really neatly packaged, ready to go sort of FPV filming rig that they can use and rely on to get certain specific shots. That might be somebody who's got a lot of experience, who knows how to really handle themselves, handle the drone, and also work all the camera settings and all that kind of stuff. I don't think this is for beginners at all. I don't think it's really for anyone who's coming from a Mavic to try to get into FPV. I don't think this is the best place that you should start. I'll post some links in the description of some good setups that you can start to learn on that won't break your bank. And I think that's the best place for someone coming from a Mavic to learn how to start. If you're really good at flying FPV already, then this might be a perfect option for you. If you're trying to just get some sort of low treetop cruising shots, or if maybe you're trying to go and sort of cruise over the tops of mountains and stuff like that out in the distance, or maybe there's some cool buttes or stuff like that, then this could be a good option for you to come from a Mavic. But again, that's something that you can kind of do with a Mavic already. So you have to think long and hard about all the things that I mentioned. Figure out if that time is worth it to you to put in to get some of these shots, and ask yourself, what exactly it is that you're trying to do. So I hope this video really helped you make a decision. It's one thing to listen to all the trendies out there talk about how awesome this thing is. I mean, it's all you see all over YouTube. But what I wanted to do is bring a little bit of clarity, bring a little bit of realism to what the possibilities are with this drone, and just give you more information so you can make an informed decision. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, if you thought I was completely wrong about something, or if you really liked what I had to say. And stick around, we'll have more videos soon.